Imagine a late evening. The house has finally fallen silent after an argument. You sit alone in the living room, the warm glow of a lamp throwing long shadows on the wall. Your children are asleep upstairs, yet inside you there's a hollow feeling you can't shake. And you ask yourself, can this marriage still be saved? Or am I only holding onto something that has been broken for far too long? This question isn't yours alone. Millions of men in their 30s and 40s across the United States, the United Kingdom, and beyond wrestle with the same thought. Statistics tell us that nearly 2 out of 5 marriages will eventually end in divorce. But behind the numbers lies something deeper: the constant tension over money, the pressure of raising children, the lack of meaningful time together, and sometimes the cold silence that feels heavier than any angry words. What makes this struggle even more difficult is the paradox of midlife. You may be succeeding in your career, providing for your family, building respect in the world outside, yet feel powerless in your own home. You are expected to be the provider, the partner, and the present father all at once. And when the balance slips, the very foundation of your life feels shaky. So the question is there a way forward? Could marriage, instead of being only a burden, become a training ground for strength of character? A place where your mind and spirit are forged to endure and even to grow? The ancient Stoics believed it could. They didn't promise ease or comfort. What they offered instead was a set of timeless principles: self-control, justice, duty, and the art of accepting life's inevitable hardships without bitterness. In this journey, we will uncover how Stoic philosophy wisdom that has survived 2,000 years can help modern men face one of today's greatest social challenges: the struggle to sustain love and partnership in a world that constantly pulls us apart. And I encourage you to stay until the very end, because the final Stoic question we explore may forever change how you see love, marriage, and even your own destiny. When we talk about marriage today, we are not just speaking about a private relationship between two people. We are talking about a social institution that has been shaken, stretched, and redefined in ways no generation before us has faced. The numbers alone paint a sobering picture. In the United Kingdom, nearly 1 in 3 marriages is expected to end in divorce. In the United States, long-term studies show that about 22% of first marriages dissolve within 5 years, 36% within 10, and more than half by the 20-year mark. Imagine that. 2 out of 5 couples who stand at the altar with hope in their eyes will eventually walk away from each other. But beyond these figures are human lives: men and women trying to raise children, pay bills, manage careers, and hold on to something as fragile and complex as intimacy. For many men in midlife, marriage does not collapse all at once. It erodes slowly, through countless moments that go unnoticed until one day the distance feels irreversible. There is the constant tension over money. The cost of living has risen dramatically, and financial stress has become one of the leading triggers of marital conflict. There is the challenge of raising children, which can be both a joy and a relentless demand. Fathers often carry the pressure of being both provider and role model, and when exhaustion sets in, patience runs thin. There is also the harsh reality of time, or rather, the lack of it. Modern work culture rewards busyness, not presence. Many couples discover that they spend more hours scrolling on their phones or sitting in traffic than actually looking into each other's eyes. What makes these pressures particularly cruel is that they attack marriage from both ends. On one side, you have external stresses: jobs, bills, obligations, expectations from society. On the other, you have internal fragility, miscommunication, and spoken resentment, mismatched priorities. The result is often silence, cold, heavy, and more dangerous than shouting. Psychologists have long noted that contempt and withdrawal, not conflict itself, are the strongest predictors of divorce. When partners stop engaging, stop caring enough even to argue, that's when the foundation truly begins to crumble. And let us not ignore the unique burden placed on men. Modern culture has shifted dramatically in how it defines masculinity. A man is expected to be ambitious in his career, emotionally available at home, physically healthy, financially stable, and an attentive father all at once. To fail in any one of these roles often feels like failing as a whole. Yet no one can fulfill every expectation perfectly, and the result is a constant sense of inadequacy. Many men feel respected at work but dismissed at home, admired by strangers yet misunderstood by the very person they married. It is a lonely paradox, surrounded by people, yet deeply isolated in the space that should feel safest. This is why marriage has become not just a personal struggle, but a social crisis. Divorce does not end with two signatures on a piece of paper that ripples outward. It affects children, who must learn to navigate to households. It impacts finances, as resources that once supported one home must now sustain two. It reshapes communities, where broken families often multiply stress in schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods. And for men in particular, divorce frequently leads to health consequences, higher rates of depression, substance abuse, and even premature mortality. Marriage, for all its imperfections, is still one of the strongest predictors of stability in a man's life. Losing it is never just about losing a partner, it is about losing part of one's anchor in the world. Yet here lies the paradox worth considering. Perhaps marriage was never meant to be easy. Perhaps its very difficulties are what make it such a powerful arena for growth. The Stoics would remind us that struggle is not a detour from life, it is life itself. Seneca wrote that hardship is what reveals a man's true character. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that every obstacle is fuel for the fire of virtue. And Epictetus, born a slave and crippled in body, taught that the one thing no one can take from us is our freedom to choose how we respond. Seen through this lens, the modern marriage crisis is not just a social problem, but also a philosophical challenge. It asks each man, will you allow external pressures and ungoverned emotions to dictate the fate of your closest relationship? Or will you approach your marriage as a Stoic would, as a place to practice patience, justice, self-control, and above all, responsibility? This does not mean tolerating abuse or clinging to a dead relationship at all costs. The Stoics were not naive. They understood that some battles cannot be won, and some paths must be abandoned for the sake of integrity. But they would also argue that too many men walk away not because the marriage is impossible, but because they never trained themselves to endure the inevitable storms. If our society is to face this crisis with wisdom, it will not be through shallow hacks or quick fixes. It will require a return to ancient principles, habits of mind and spirit that can hold a family together even in the most turbulent times. That is why, in the next part of this journey, we will lay out the Stoic foundations that every man can bring into his marriage, the timeless practices that can turn conflict into opportunity and fragility into resilience. Before we dive into specific questions that Stoic philosophy can guide us to ask, it's important to establish the foundations. Because if marriage is one of the hardest arenas of life, then we need to know what weapons of the mind we are carrying into the battle. The Stoics were not interested in abstract theories alone. Their philosophy was always meant to be lived applied to the marketplace, the battlefield, the dinner table. And so it can be applied to the home, where many of today's most painful conflicts take place. The first foundation is the dichotomy of control, the radical yet liberating idea that some things are within our power, and many others are not. In marriage, this distinction is crucial. You cannot control your partner's moods, her upbringing, her automatic reactions, or her past wounds. But you can control your words, your tone, your presence, and your ability to pause before responding. How many arguments escalate simply because one person demanded control over what could never be theirs? Epictetus reminds us, "You may fetter my leg, but not even Zeus has the power to overcome my freedom of choice. If he could say this as a crippled slave." Surely we can remember it when facing an impatient spouse. The second foundation is premeditatio malorum, the practice of imagining in advance the hardships to come. Most people enter marriage imagining only the joys, the romance, the laughter, the companionship. Few pause to ask, what will I do when the money runs out? When my partner gets sick? When exhaustion makes us strangers to each other? The Stoics trained themselves to rehearse these scenarios, not to become pessimists, but to be prepared. A husband who expects challenges does not crumble when they arrive. He steadies himself because he has already faced them in his mind. This mindset transforms surprise into resilience. The third foundation is Amor, Fati, to love one's fate, not just accept it. This is perhaps the hardest lesson for modern relationships. We live in a culture obsessed with upgrades. If your phone is slow, replace it. If your job is stressful, quit. If your marriage is not perfect, walk away. But the Stoics taught something radically different: to embrace not only the good, but also the difficult as necessary threads in the fabric of life. To say, yes, this is hard, but it is mine. And because it is mine, I will not resent it. I will make it fuel for growth. In marriage, Amor Fati means not waiting for the ideal partner, but learning to love your partner fully, flaws and all, because their imperfection is part of your shared story. Finally, there is duty and justice, the call to act rightly because it is right, not because it earns applause. Seneca wrote, "The wise man does not do what he does for approval. He does what is right because it is his duty." In marriage, this translates into showing up for your spouse and children even when you feel unappreciated. It is easy to be kind when you are thanked, attentive when you're admired. But Stoic justice is tested when your actions go unnoticed. Do you still keep your word? Do you still provide, protect, and nurture? These duties are not optional, they are the pillars of a family's stability, taken together. These four foundations form a kind of inner compass. They do not guarantee that a marriage will last forever, but they guarantee that you, as a man, will approach your relationship with clarity, preparation, acceptance, and integrity. And often, that alone is enough to transform the atmosphere of a home. Because when one partner changes the way he thinks, the whole dynamic begins to shift. With these Stoic foundations in mind, we are ready to move into the practical side of this philosophy, the questions. Over the next 5 sections, we will explore 5 Stoic-inspired questions that every man should ask himself. Questions that can change not only how you see your marriage, but how you live within it. The first one is deceptively simple, but it is the cornerstone of everything else. What exactly are you trying to control in your marriage? Every marriage, no matter how strong, eventually runs into the same invisible wall, the desire to control what cannot be controlled. Husbands try to reshape their wives' personalities. Wives try to manage their husbands' habits. Both try, in vain, to bend another human being into an ideal that exists only in their imagination. And each time the effort fails, as it inevitably does, resentment grows. The Stoics understood this trap long before psychologists gave it a name. Epictetus, born a slave and crippled in body, said, "Some things are in our control and others not. Within our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion. Outside our control are body, property, reputation, office and, I might add, the mood of your spouse." He knew that freedom is not found in bending the world to your will, but in aligning your will to reality. Think about how many arguments in your marriage have started with the illusion of control. You expect your partner to react in a certain way, and when she doesn't, you lash out. You try to script her response, her level of gratitude, her way of parenting, her attitude after a long day. When reality diverges from expectation, anger follows. But the problem is not her, it is your unwillingness to admit that her mind and her choices are hers alone. To bring this home, picture a common scenario. A husband comes home late from work, exhausted. He hopes for a peace and warmth. Instead, he is met with complaints about chores undone or children acting out. His first instinct is to defend himself. "Can't you just appreciate how hard I work?" The wife, equally tired, feels unheard. "Can't you see how much I've been carrying alone?" The fight escalates. Both are demanding control over the other's recognition, emotion, and perspective. Both are reaching for what is outside their grasp. Now, imagine the same situation approached through Stoic discipline. The husband pauses. He reminds himself, her frustration is not mine to control. My words and tone, however, are within my power. He listens before reacting. He acknowledges her burden, even if he feels unappreciated. Instead of insisting on gratitude, he offers presence. The energy of the evening changes instantly. No fireworks, no dramatic reconciliation, just the quiet power of self-mastery redirecting the course of the night. This does not mean passivity. Stoicism is not about becoming a doormat. It is about drawing the line clearly. This is mine to govern. That is hers. You can and should discuss boundaries, responsibilities, and expectations in marriage. But you do so from a place of agency, not control. You don't demand that your spouse never feel anger. You ask yourself, how will I respond when she does? You don't insist that your spouse always see things your way. You ask, can I express my view without making hers irrelevant? When men forget this principle, they often swing between two extremes, domination and withdrawal. Some try to dominate, raising their voices, laying down ultimatums, confusing force with respect. Others retreat, shutting down emotionally, avoiding conflict, refusing to engage at all. Both extremes erode intimacy. Control breeds resentment, while withdrawal breeds distance. The Stoic path is different. To stand firm in self-control while leaving space for the freedom of another. There is also a hidden benefit here. By focusing only on what is within your control, you preserve your dignity. How many times have you lowered yourself in anger, only to regret your words later? How many times have you carried bitterness long after the conflict ended? A Stoic learns that dignity is not preserved by winning arguments, but by mastering oneself in the heat of them. Epictetus would remind us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The same is true in marriage. You cannot control whether your wife had a hard day, whether your child threw a tantrum, whether the world piled pressure on your household. But you can control the man you are when you walk through the door. That choice, repeated daily, is what builds or breaks the bond. So ask yourself this first Stoic question. What exactly am I trying to control in my marriage? If the answer is anything other than your own actions, words, and choices, then you are setting yourself up for endless frustration. But if you can narrow your focus, accept your limits, and take ownership of yourself, you may find that much of the tension you once blamed on your partner begins to dissolve. Not because she changed, but because you finally did. Every relationship eventually faces storms. Sometimes they arrive in small gusts like a disagreement about money or a missed anniversary. Other times they roar in like a hurricane: illness, job loss, betrayal, or the grinding whir of years lived under stress. The question is not whether adversity will come. It will. The question is, how will you respond when it does? The Stoics were adamant that adversity is not an accident to be feared, but a certainty to be prepared for. Marcus Aurelius began many of his journal entries by reminding himself, today you will meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. He did not write these words in bitterness. but in preparation. He knew that the disappointment of expecting perfection is worse than the adversity itself. By lowering his expectation of ease, he raised his capacity for endurance. Now apply this to marriage. Many couples enter with fantasies of unbroken happiness. They imagine their partner as a lifelong companion who will always understand, always support, always forgive. But when real life shows up with its unpaid bills, crying children, and restless nights, they feel blindsided, disillusioned. They say, "I didn't sign up for this." But of course, they did. They just didn't realize it. The truth is, most divorces are not caused by extraordinary betrayals, but by ordinary adversities mishandled. A husband comes home after a stressful day, hoping for rest. Instead, he's met with frustration from his wife. His reflex is to snap back, to defend himself, to escalate the tension. Another husband, trained in Stoic discipline, might pause. He recalls, this moment was always coming. Hard days are part of marriage. A frustration is real, but my reaction is mine. He softens his tone. He chooses curiosity instead of defensiveness. Tell me what's weighing on you. The conflict does not vanish, but it does not ignite into fire either. His choice of response has turned adversity into connection. Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics knew long ago. It is not the presence of conflict that predicts divorce, but how couples handle it. John Gottman's decades of research show that marriages survive even high levels of conflict if the partners maintain a ratio of 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative. What kills a marriage is not fighting, it is contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, and escalation. In other words, it is not adversity itself, but our reaction to it that corrodes the bond. Consider another example. A family faces financial strain. The husband feels the weight of providing. The wife feels the weight of managing what little remains. Fear and blame creep into every conversation. One path leads to mutual accusation. You're not doing enough. Well, you're not managing well enough. Another path, the Stoic path, begins with acceptance. Yes, times are hard. But hardship was always part of the deal. We can't change the economy, but we can change how we face it together. This simple shift in response can turn a financial storm into an exercise in solidarity. Stoicism is not naive. It does not ask you to pretend that adversity is pleasant. It asks you to recognize that adversity is the very material from which strength is forged. Seneca wrote, "Fire tests gold, adversity tests the brave." A marriage that never faces hardship will never grow roots deep enough to last. Only by enduring storms do partners learn what they are truly capable of. The challenge for men, especially in midlife, is to resist the temptation of immediate reaction. Anger feels powerful in the moment, but weakens you in the long run. Withdrawal feels safe, but creates distance that may never be bridged. The Stoic way is different. It is to pause, breathe, and ask, what response here aligns with my values, not my impulses? By doing so, you shift from being a slave of circumstance to being a master of yourself. So let this question settle in your mind. How do you respond to adversity in your marriage? Do you meet hardship with anger, defensiveness, or despair? Or do you see it as Marcus Aurelius did, as inevitable, and therefore as an opportunity to practice patience, courage, and love? Your answer will often decide not only the survival of your marriage, but the shape of your own character. One of the most common laments in struggling marriages is not "we fight too much," but "I don't feel heard," beneath the arguments about chores, money, or parenting lies a deeper wound, the sense that one's voice has lost its value. Husbands complain their wives never acknowledge how hard they work. Wives confess they feel invisible in their own homes. Both speak, but neither listens. The Stoics valued logos, reason, word, and speech as one of the highest gifts of human beings. To them, Conversation was not just an exchange of sounds, but the means by which we connect, understand, and live in harmony with others. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that human beings were created for cooperation, not conflict, and that communication was the bridge to that cooperation. So what does it mean to truly listen in marriage? It means offering attention without planning your rebuttal. It means hearing the emotion behind the words, not just the words themselves. It means creating space for your partner's perspective, even when it is uncomfortable to sit with. And this, ironically, requires more strength than speaking. Anyone can fire back a sharp retort. Few can remain silent long enough to let another person finish their thought without interruption. Consider a typical evening. A wife begins sharing her frustrations about the day. Before she finishes, her husband jumps in with solutions. Why don't you just do this? Or with self-defense, you think I have it easy. The wife grows more frustrated, not because her husband refused to help, but because he never paused to acknowledge her feelings. He heard the words but missed the meaning. Now picture the same scene approached with Stoic awareness. The husband reminds himself, my role here is not to control her emotions or fix them immediately. My role is to listen with discipline. He stays quiet until she finishes. Then, instead of dismissing or defending, he reflects back what he heard. It sounds like today was really heavy for you, and you felt alone in it. The simple act of naming her experience builds connection. No problem has yet been solved, but trust has been restored. Listening also protects us from the arrogance of assuming we already know. Epictetus warned, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, that we may listen twice as much as we speak in marriage. This ratio is rarely respected. Too often, we assume we know what our partner means before they have finished speaking. We cut them off. We fill in their sentences. We jump ahead. But this is not listening, it is projection. True listening suspends judgment long enough to see reality as it is, not as we imagine it. Of course, listening does not mean agreeing with everything. The Stoics were clear that reason must guide us, not blind submission. But genuine listening ensures that when disagreement comes, it rests on understanding, not misunderstanding. A marriage where partners disagree after hearing each other is far stronger than one where they agree without ever truly paying attention. So ask yourself, when my spouse speaks, do I listen to understand or to respond? Do I give her the dignity of my attention, or do I reduce her voice to background noise? In an age of constant distraction, phones buzzing, screens glowing, one of the most radical acts of love is to put everything down and look directly at the person in front of you. Listening may seem simple, almost trivial, but in truth, it is one of the hardest disciplines of marriage. It requires humility, patience, and the willingness to put ego aside. And it is deeply Stoic, because it embodies self-control, justice, and respect for another human being. In many cases, what saves a marriage is not grand gestures or elaborate plans, but the quiet, consistent practice of truly hearing one another. When we hear the word justice, most of us think of courts, laws, and politics. But to the Stoics, justice was not confined to the public square. It was a principle that governed every relationship, including the most intimate one, marriage. For Marcus Aurelius, justice was simply doing what is right, and for Seneca, it was living in such a way that others could rely on your integrity. In marriage, justice is not about grand declarations. It is about fairness. It is about whether you shoulder your share of the burdens, whether you honor promises spoken and unspoken, and whether you treat your spouse not as an accessory to your life, but as an equal partner in a modern marriages often falter not because of betrayal or abuse, but because of a slow imbalance of duties. One partner silently carries more housework, more childcare, more emotional labor, while the other remains unaware or indifferent. Resentment grows in the shadows until it spills into anger. The injustice is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is as small as one person always being the one to pick up after the children, or always being the one to plan family events. But accumulated over years, these small injustices weigh as heavily as major offenses. The Stoic approach to justice demands that we look honestly at what we owe, not what we feel like giving, but what is right to give. Seneca wrote, "The wise man does not consider what is pleasant, but what is due. This is the heart of marital duty. To us not, do I feel appreciated enough to do this, but rather, is this my responsibility? And if so, will I do it regardless of recognition?" Take the example of a father who feels unacknowledged. He works long hours, pays the bills, and wonders why his wife does not shower him with gratitude. But if he stops at resentment, he misses the Stoic point. His duty as a provider is not nullified by lack of praise. Justice is not dependent on applause. A man's word and action should stand on their own integrity, not on whether someone notices them. To stop fulfilling your duties because you feel underappreciated is to let ego, not virtue, guide you. Justice in marriage also means being fair in expectations. It is unjust to demand patience from your spouse when you offer none yourself. It is unjust to expect her to listen when you dismiss her voice. It is unjust to enjoy freedoms you deny her. The Stoic call to justice is a mirror, reflecting back whether you're living as a man of fairness or as a man of entitlement. Of course, justice is not one-sided. Your spouse also has duties, but Stoicism teaches us to begin with what is within our control, our own conduct. By modeling fairness, you set a tone. By carrying your share faithfully, you create the moral authority to ask for the same in return. Justice is contagious. When one partner embodies it consistently, it often awakens the conscience of the other. So ask yourself, am I living with justice in my marriage? Am I fulfilling my duties not because they are pleasant, not because they are recognized, but because they are mine to bear? The honest answer to this question can transform resentment into resolve. For once you stop negotiating fairness by tallying points and instead live out justice as a virtue, you reclaim dignity. The Stoics remind us that justice is never wasted. Even if unnoticed, it strengthens your character. Even if unappreciated, it makes your household steadier. And even if unreciprocated, it allows you to look in the mirror and know you have done your part. And in marriage, that knowledge is sometimes the very thing that holds a man together when everything else feels uncertain. Of all the Stoic principles, few are more demanding or more liberating than Amor, Fati, the love of one's feet. Not resignation, not grudging acceptance, but genuine love for whatever life brings. It is one thing to endure difficulty with clenched teeth. It is another to say, this, too, is mine and I will embrace it fully. In marriage, this principle may be the most radical of all, because every union, no matter how romantic its beginning, eventually reveals itself as imperfect. Your spouse will disappoint you, as you will disappoint her. The children you raise will bring both joy and exhaustion. The life you build together will include laughter, but also illness, debt, conflict, and loss. If you marry only the fantasy of what you wanted, then disillusionment is inevitable. But if you marry the reality of what is the whole of it, the beauty and the burden, then you're practicing Amor. Fati, Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, and a man who lost many of his own children to early death, often wrote of accepting fate not with bitterness but with gratitude. He reminded himself, love only that which happens, which is spun with the thread of your destiny. For what could more aptly fit your needs? Applied to marriage, this means seeing your partner not as a collection of flaws to be endured, but as the very person fate entrusted to you for growth. Her challenges are part of your training. Her imperfections are the grindstone against which your patience, compassion, and strength are sharpened. Consider a modern example. A husband finds himself frustrated by his wife's habits, her tendency to worry, her insistence on details he overlooks. Over time, he grows resentful, wishing she were more like the ideal woman he imagines. But then he remembers Amor Fati. He reframes her worries as signs of her care for the family. He sees her attention to detail as a compliment to his own big picture thinking. Instead of fighting reality, he leans into it. He begins to love not just her virtues, but her peculiarities. Because they are woven into the fabric of their shared life, this shift is more than sentiment, it is strength. Many men waste years resenting what they cannot change. Amor Fati ends the war with reality. It transforms frustration into fuel. Where there is hardship, there is also a chance to practice courage. Where there is boredom, there is a chance to practice gratitude. Where there is difference, there is a chance to practice humility. To love your fate in marriage is to say, I will not spend my life wishing for a different partner, a different season, a different story. I will love the one I have, because it is mine, and because it is through this very fate that I will grow. This does not mean denying pain. If there is abuse, betrayal, or irreparable harm, Amor Fati does not command you to remain chained to destruction. The Stoics were not advocates of martyrdom for its own sake. They taught discernment, knowing when entrance strengthens and when separation preserves integrity. But for the vast majority of marriages, the issue is not catastrophic harm, but daily friction. And in those cases, Amor Fati is the antidote to resentment. Think of it this way. When you stood at the altar, you did not just vow to love in joy. You vowed to love in sickness, in hardship, in loss. Amor Fati is that vow lived daily. It is saying yes to the whole picture, not just the highlights. It is loving not the marriage you wish you had, but the marriage you actually do. And here lies a secret. When you begin to love your fate, the marriage itself often improves. Resentment softens, gratitude grows. Your partner senses the change not in your words alone, but in your presence. Instead of carrying the silent accusation that she has failed your expectations, you carry the calm assurance that you're exactly where you're meant to be. That steadiness, more than flowers or speeches, restores trust. So ask yourself this fifth and final Stoic question. Do I love my fate in marriage? Not tolerate it, not survive it, but love it. Because if you can reach this place, then even the storms become part of your story, and even the imperfections become teachers. Amor Fati is not about a marriage that looks perfect to outsiders. It is about a marriage that makes you more human, more resilient, and more at peace with the life you're given. When you embrace this principle, the pressure to chase an ideal spouse dissolves. You realize you already have the ideal training ground, the one beside you, the one who tests and teaches you daily. To love your fate in marriage is to say, this is the life I was meant to live, and I would not trade it for another. Philosophy, if it is to matter at all, must step off the page and into the rhythm of our daily lives. The Stoics never wrote simply to entertain or impress. They wrote to train, to prepare, to shape men who could endure storms. And marriage, with its joys and its strains, may be the truest storm of them all. That is why reflection alone is not enough. We need a structure, a practice, something we can carry into each day. So imagine, for a moment, that the next 30 days of your life are not ordinary days, but a workshop in which you rebuild your marriage by rebuilding yourself. The first week is devoted to clarity. Each evening, you take a few minutes to write down the events of the day, especially those moments of tension. Then you separate them into two categories. What was in your control and what was not? Perhaps your spouse's sharp tone was not in your control, but your reaction, the words you chose, the way you raised your voice or chose silence, that was yours. Over the course of 7 days, a pattern emerges. You begin to see how much energy is wasted trying to govern what was never yours to govern. And slowly, your focus narrows. You stop demanding perfection from others and start demanding discipline from yourself. In the second week, you train yourself to meet adversity before it arrives. Each morning, you rehearse the challenges that might come. Maybe the budget conversation will spark tension. Maybe the children will melt down at dinner. Maybe exhaustion will make temper short. Rather than dreading these possibilities, you welcome them in your imagination and prepare your response. If my wife is upset, I will not meet her anger with my own. If criticism comes, I will sift it for truth before defending myself. This exercise is not pessimism, it is armor. And when the hard moment inevitably comes, you are not caught off guard. You are ready. The third week shifts to justice. Here you take an honest look at how the burdens of the household are carried. For 7 days, you notice who does what, who plans, who cleans, who comforts, who sacrifices. You do not keep score for the sake of winning, but to see clearly whether the balance is fair. And if it is not, you take responsibility, not out of guilt or demand for recognition, but out of duty. Seneca reminds us, the wise man acts not because it is pleasant, but because it is right. When you pick up your share of the weight, resentment begins to lift not just from your partner, but from yourself. For nothing corrodes dignity faster than knowing you are not doing your part. The final week turns to conversation. Twice during these 7 days, you sit down with your spouse for a half hour of deliberate dialogue. You begin not with accusation, but with observation. I noticed we argued about money twice this week. Then you name the feeling. It left me anxious and disconnected. You reveal the need beneath the feeling. I need to feel that we are a team when it comes to finances. And finally, you make a request. Could we sit down together on Sunday to create a plan? What emerges is not blame, but collaboration. You are no longer to opponents scoring points, but to partners building a shared path. Why 30 days? Because a month is long enough to loosen old habits and begin to shape new ones. By the end of this journey, you will have practiced control, preparation, justice, and dialogue not once, but over and over until they begin to take root. And even if your partner does not change immediately, you will have changed. You will be calmer, fairer, steadier. And when one person in a marriage shifts, the entire relationship starts to shift with them. This is the Stoic way, philosophy lived, tested in the arena of the everyday. 30 days is only a beginning, but it is enough to remind you that love is not sustained by wishful thinking. It is sustained by discipline, by practice, by the daily choice to live as the best version of yourself. And if you can do that, day after day, then the storms of marriage become not the end of love, but the very soil in which it grows stronger. Marriage has always been one of humanity's greatest teachers. It is where our ideals of love collide with the realities of daily life. It is where we learn, sometimes painfully, that passion alone cannot hold two people together, but discipline, justice, patience, and acceptance might. For men in midlife, the challenge of marriage can feel overwhelming. The numbers tell us many unions will break apart. The pressures of money, time, and family seem unrelenting. And yet, within this very crucible lies the chance for a transformation. The Stoics would remind us that hardship is not an interruption to life, it is life itself. Epictetus told us that freedom is found not in controlling others, but in mastering ourselves. Marcus Aurelius taught us to expect ingratitude and selfishness, and to meet them with steadiness rather than surprise. Seneca reminded us that duty matters most when no one is watching. These lessons are not relics of the ancient world. They are tools we can use, here and now, to face the storms of marriage without being destroyed by them. If you take nothing else from this journey, remember this: You do not need to control everything in your marriage to make it stronger. You need only to control yourself, your words, your tone, your presence, your fairness, your willingness to love even the difficult parts of fate. That alone can change the atmosphere of a home. That alone can shift a relationship from fragile to resilient. And if you found value in these reflections, then I invite you to continue this journey with us. On this channel, StoicCraft, we explore not just the philosophy of ancient Rome and Greece, but its living application to the struggles men face today at work, in relationships, and within themselves. Subscribe, join the community, and bring these teachings into your own life. Because marriage, like philosophy, is never finished, it is practiced daily. And the more you practice, the stronger you become. So, the choice is yours. You can view marriage as a burden, a weight to carry, or you can see it as the very training ground where you forge resilience, patience, and love. The Stoics have shown us the way. The question is, will you walk it?